Yeah.
This is a U.S. war versus Russia. Doesn't this need to be resolved before we can start saying, well, let's go and develop the Arctic together and have a good time, and you guys come
Yeah.
over and visit our embassy? It's like, look, the United States is military is being attrited to nothingness. Our whole empire is collapsing because of this conflict. We're pouring everything we are in there. Ukraine has lost an unbelievable amount of men. They are running out of people. This whole thing is blowing up, and we can't just pretend to just let's restart these arms deals when we're engaged in a conflict with each other. This
Yeah.
has to be resolved first. So
Right.
and it's a little bit depressing to think that Trump just that you think that it's unlikely that Trump would ever even consider giving those four oblasts. Because my
Yeah.
concern was that will Russia be okay with just giving those four oblasts? Because I imagine most of Russia now is saying, no, we need Odessa. Those are our brothers and sisters there too. We need to connect to Transnistria, Kharkov as well. We need to liberate those people. We can't leave them by under
Right.
this Banderite regime. So we need to go to the Dnieper at least, and we need to get to Odessa and connect to Transnistria. Like that. That's kind of what I'm thinking is like the best middle ground is if we get those four oblasts. It's like maybe that's the compromise we can do. That's something that
Yeah.
those
Right.
had the referendum.
Yeah.
Those were what Putin consistently said. These are part of Russian territory. That's not it. Just be hopeful that Russia doesn't demand more because they have the right to take it. I'm not the
Yeah.
right. They have the ability
Yeah.
to take it,
Right.
and they have the support within those regions to be there. So
Right.
like they have the support within their own country and in those places that they're going to be
Right.
going.
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
just pray that you can say those four oblasts, Putin will accept it. And if you're saying that Trump can't even say it, then I'm just like, well, what are we doing here? Because I don't even know
Right.
if Russia would accept this.
Right. Well, I mean, again, Putin laid it out June 14th of last year, right? That these were the Russian demands, and they have restated not just Putin himself, but Lavrov and Peskov and all of them. Again and again, they have restated these are the demands. They've made it crystal clear. These are the demands. Now, these are described as maximalist demands by the West, but I think you're right. Actually, they're not maximalists. These are the minimum demands. There are a lot of people in Russia, as you point out, who would actually be very disappointed if the Russians settled for that. So these are really their minimum demands. And again, if there was just a glimmer of intelligence and awareness, self-awareness, within the West, or just an acknowledgement of the reality, they would take this. This is a deal. This is a deal okay, I think Putin can make good on this. He'll get some flack from it, but this is something the Russians would accept by and large. His government, his people, a lot of them wouldn't be happy with it, but they could accept it. And you should take it because again, if you don't take it, it is going to be, as you say, everything to the east of the Dnieper, and also the coast of the Black Sea, including
Right.
Odessa and Nikolaev. It's just going to be that. But there's just no realism on the other side. It's just a lot of sloganeering. And but anyway, yeah, I wanted to go back to what you were saying about, but can they actually talk about these other things? And I think you make a very good point. I think you're to a great extent correct. With a war going on, there are a lot of things that you can't do. And unless, okay, the war could go on, but if the U.S. really does pull out of it, truly pulls out of it, then we could see progress on those other fronts. The problem, okay, but if it continues to be a proxy war, if the Russians see that the Americans are using this to essentially to bring them down, to do as much damage as they can to Russia, then the arms control treaties and so on and so forth, and the economic cooperation really becomes impossible. I think you're right. And in fact, the Russians pulled out a part of the START treaty, the New START, because for this very reason. They said, you are a hostile power. You demonstrated that you're actually, engaged in a war in us. And so we cannot actually continue to implement all of this treaty. And so, yeah, I think it becomes a real impediment to future arms control. Now, if the war continues, but the Americans pull out and they truly pull out, then okay, that changes things. There are some things that they still can do regardless of whether the war is going on, like restaffing the embassy, restoring, flights between the two countries, that kind of thing. And, that does mean something. But I think you make a good point about how, the war can't be ignored. You can't, you do have to solve it, at least in part, before you go on to the other things.
Right. I mean, what I'm hoping comes out of this is that there is at least some proposed settlement. And Trump will probably know that the Europeans and Ukraine will reject it. Putin understands that as well. But they just say, we got to do this and give them a proposal for peace to say that this is what we agree on. And this is what the U.S. wants to see done. And if it doesn't get done and we don't get to this agreement, then we're out. And it gives Trump a way out. So, who knows exactly what it is that they agree on? Maybe it's the four oblasts, maybe it's something else. But there just needs to be something, even if there's a mutual understanding between both Putin and Trump that like what we're presenting here is just something that we know that so Ukraine's going to reject, Zelensky's rejecting, the Europeans are going to reject. Fine. That's what we want him to do. Then you can say, look, this is the plan that I gave you. You didn't want to take it, so we're out. We're not going to be part of this anymore. Is that possible?
Yeah. I think I think actually in an earlier episode, I said that may be Putin's main objective. It's just that, again, giving Trump some kind of off ramp. A settlement's impossible, but if they can, if something can be, I don't know what it is really, but if there is, some kind of agreement, I think it could only be a partial agreement, but it's just some kind of agreement was reached that could be seen as a first step towards a total settlement. But it would be reached with the knowledge, at least on Putin's part, that Ukraine and the Europeans are going to reject it. And, he'll bank on that, and then they will reject it. And then it does make it easier. He's going to help just kind of just open the way for Trump, to move, to leave. And again, like I said, it's going to be hard for Trump to do that, but do everything you possibly can to make it easier to make that move. Again, I don't know exactly what that would be. I mean, we've heard about these talks about, at least, maybe having Ukraine actually withdraw from Donetsk, giving all of the Donbass, and then having further negotiations about the other oblasts. Now, I don't think that's actually would be a good idea. I would think like Putin probably wouldn't want the Ukrainians to agree to this. But he'll do something like that because he knows that the Ukrainians won't agree to it. And, again, that shows, hey, I made this concession. You guys shot it down. What can we do? And then, again, Trump can echo that.
Right. Well, it sounds like it's only a matter of weeks, months before Russia has all of Donetsk already. Maybe you can give us a battlefield update. Maybe you can say what I said if you agree with that at all, because from my understanding, Pokrovsk is crumbling. It looks like they're making rapid movements now, like 10, 11 kilometers in a day. And it looks like they could do a giant cauldron for the rest of Donetsk soon if the way it's going.
Yeah, well, the dramatic news is it was yesterday that they broke through to the north of Pokrovsk and, like you said, advanced 10, 11 kilometers in a day, which is almost unheard of in this war, with the exception of the early weeks of the war. Now so they actually ended up in a place pretty much in between Konstantinivka, which is to the north, and Pokrovsk. So it actually, it
or is
extends,
it Kramatorsk, right? Kramatorsk?
No, not Kramatorsk. No, that's farther to the north. It's Konstantinivka. Yeah, so it actually contributed to the siege of Konstantinivka at the same time that it contributes to the, expanded and tightened the siege around Pokrovsk. I think by doing this, they cut off another main supply route. And but the main thing is just the speed with which they did it. And I was reading a very careful analysis of this by Simplicius the thinker. People point to the fact that, okay, there are just fewer Ukrainian soldiers. The morale is low. They're not as well armed, etc. This is all true, but apparently there's also been these tactical improvements on the Russian side that have forced the Ukrainians to reconfigure their defenses. It's just that they have become much better at, I think, locating and targeting fortifications on the Ukrainian side. And that has, so when the Ukrainians fire from these places, the Russians very quickly determine where the fire came from, and then deliver, artillery or one of these glide bombs, the FABs, the FABs, and which are enormously destructive. It can just take out the entire fortification. And the Ukrainians have been forced to actually to reduce the size of their fortifications along the lines. So you have just basically a foxhole with 2 or 3 guys in a tree line or something, and to disperse some more. And then these guys are hunkered down most of the time because they're scared of revealing their location. So the Russians were able to penetrate. They sent small groups of men. We're talking about 2 or 3 at a time. They figured out where the Ukrainians were located, and they just passed between, these foxholes, went deep into the rear, and then they joined up together behind them. So it's just like passing through a sieve, and then, and then reassembling or assembling on the other side. And it happened there, north of Pokrovsk, but I think that's also what happened to the south of Pokrovsk, where they entered into the city itself, and they are now deep, in the center of the city. So the city is not only under siege, and the siege is continually tightening. They're actually in the city and actually cutting it into pieces, so that the Ukrainian forces in the city are they're not just being cut off from support in the rear, they're actually being cut off from each other. So it really looks very grim. It's clear that they're not going to be able to hold on to the city for very long. And it's also suggestive of just a general weakening of the Ukrainian lines.
Yeah, I heard, I believe from Colonel Douglas McGregor, that sometimes one of the reasons they go in fast as well is the Russians will come up to some defensive line trenches, but it's empty because there's not enough people to be manning them now. They just don't have enough men to fill them up, or maybe they're abandoning their posts, or because they realize that if they shoot their weapons, they're going to be killed. So they're like, what are we doing here? You just kind of start to wonder. So, what do you think this will have much of an impact, do you think, on the meeting in Alaska, if we see this sort of even more, this continued rapid advance, and all of a sudden it's like more and more territories being taken?
That Trump probably, is it's probably too late to have an effect on that. I mean, it's significant, but again, it hasn't received the coverage in the West that it should. I think it'll have to be something even more dramatic before it really breaks through the news cycle and changes things. I think it's too late to have a real effect. It should, but I don't think it will.
Something that I was thinking about as well, just talking about how far the Russians will go, and if they don't come to this agreement with the 4 oblasts, it's likely going to be more. I think that the Russian army itself doesn't want to stop. I know if you're reading Western propaganda, you just think that they're being these human wave tactics and the morale is rock bottom. But I sent you a video a couple months ago from a show called Real Reporter about this Russian that lived in Canada and then went back to Russia when the SMO started, because he felt just this patriotic duty, enlisted and became a drone operator. It was very fascinating. It was interesting listening to him because, he spoke good English because he lived in Canada so long. Mm-hmm. But at the end, he made a statement. He said that the army doesn't want to stop. They don't want a settlement, that the Russian army wants to keep going, that for them, this is a real work. He said this is a real work for a Russian man. And we don't want, and this is not just a sentiment that he shares, that he knows that everybody in the army shares, that this is a moral patriotic duty, that they're defending, their homeland, and they're freeing their Russian speaking brothers and sisters, and they will not stop, that this is something that they're very determined, very driven. So I just think the military itself doesn't want to stop. So I think, if they don't cut this deal, I think that the advances are going to be much more rapid, and they're going to be taking a lot more territory very, very quickly. And then I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's likely, and how does this play out?
It's like, it's always hard to time these things. Like, it's just the same thing in economics. Like, you can point to a collapse, or you're going to say the bubble's going to burst, and you can say that with great confidence. And the bubble does eventually burst. It happens. We've gone through all these economic cycles, and the people who predict that it will burst always are proven correct. And there are always some people that are just sort of pretend that it can't happen. It's going to always go on, and the economy is like is on a kind of an eternal ascent, But anyway, enough of that metaphor. It's just that but it's the same thing. It's just I with confidence, I can say there will be a tipping point. There will be some kind of collapse, and we may be right at that tipping point right now. I mean, it's just like, you just look at the facts. It's just like the facts are that Ukraine is getting weaker and weaker. Both in terms of manpower and equipment, and the Russians are getting stronger and stronger again, both in terms of manpower and equipment. And if you, at some point, the gap, the strength of the Russian army versus the weakness of the Ukrainian army will be such that, the lines just can't hold at all. And in spite of all the Ukrainian efforts, and there will be a collapse. We'll see, like what we just saw north of Pokrovsk, but up and down the line. And maybe that's just around the corner. It's just, again, actually, the timing, that question of when it's going to happen is just, I think, is always it's very difficult to predict. I'll just say, I think probably we'll see something, or we'll hit that tipping point before the end of this year, and it could be, again, even much sooner. But I find it very, very difficult. There's so many times when I thought that maybe we were there. It just looks like we're eventually we'll hit it, and I suspect that we're very close, but I don't know exactly how close we are.